In the spring of 1987, a demolition crew tearing down the abandoned Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Annex in Pittsburgh found something that shouldn't have existed. Behind a false wall in the basement darkroom sealed with plaster and painted over decades ago, they discovered a metal filing cabinet. Inside were 347 photographs, black and white, meticulously labeled, dated between 1931 and 1958. The subjects were children, but the Pennsylvania Department of Health had no record of them. No birth certificates, no death certificates, no hospital admissions. The counties listed on the photo labels, Venango, Forest, Clarion, claimed these cases never occurred. Dr. Ambrose Crenshaw, the photographer, had been the state's chief medical examiner from 1929 to 1959. His official reports were models of bureaucratic precision. But in his hidden archive, he documented something else entirely. A catalogue of human deformities so severe, so systematic, that the state legislature quietly declared them statistical impossibilities and ordered all evidence destroyed. In 1961, Crenshaw had disobeyed. The photographs show infants with fused skulls, toddlers with vestigial limbs emerging from their torsos, siblings with identical cranial malformations, born years apart to mothers who were themselves sisters. And in nearly every image, written in Crenshaw's spidery handwriting across the bottom margin, the same three words: consanguinity, repeat occurrence. This is the story the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania tried to erase. Before we open this file, subscribe and drop a comment telling us which state you're from. These buried records only survive when people remember them. The demolition foreman, a man named Carl Dupree, nearly threw the photographs away. He assumed they were medical teaching slides, clinical, impersonal. But one image stopped him cold. It showed a boy, perhaps 9 years old, sitting upright in a hospital bed. His eyes were wide, aware, intelligent, but his skull was grotesquely elongated, tapering to a point at the crown. His fingers, Dupree counted them twice, numbered 7 on each hand. And written on the back of the photograph in faded ink, subject Walter Kinloch, age 9. Mother Edith Kinloch, née Kinloch. Father Thomas Kinloch. Relation first cousins. Forest County. 4th documented case in family line. Subject deceased 03/12/1947. Cause respiratory collapse. Specimen retained. Dupree brought the file to the Allegheny County coroner, who immediately contacted the Pennsylvania State Archives. What followed was 2 years of bureaucratic silence, punctuated by carefully worded denials. The state's position was clear. Dr. Crenshaw had been a dedicated public servant, but in his later years, he'd grown obsessed with rare genetic anomalies. The photographs, they suggested, were either misattributed cases from other states or, more troublingly, evidence of Crenshaw's deteriorating mental health. The families named in his notes could not be located. The counties had no corresponding death records. Case closed, but Dupree had made copies, and in 1991, a forensic genealogist named Dr. Lillian Vasquez began comparing Crenshaw's labels against century-old census records, church registries, and county land deeds. What she found was not a hoax, it was a pattern. The Kinloch family first appeared in Forest County, Pennsylvania in the early 1870s. They were Scottish immigrants, drawn to the remote Allegheny Plateau by cheap land and timber work. By 1880, the census recorded 23 Kinlochs spread across 3 adjoining properties near the village of Tionesta. They kept to themselves. Dr. Vasquez's research revealed something immediately unsettling. The Kinlochs rarely married outside their surname. Between 1875 and 1950, she documented at least 19 marriages between first cousins and 7 between uncle and niece. Pennsylvania law permitted first cousin marriage, but the frequency here was staggering. And then there were the children. Parish records from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Tionesta listed dozens of Kinloch baptisms, but a disturbing number were followed within weeks by burial entries. Causes of death were vague: failure to thrive, constitutional weakness, malformation incompatible with life. One entry, dated November 1903, was more specific: infant Kinloch, unnamed, born to Ruth Kinloch and Samuel Kinloch, her father's brother. Lived 4 days. Facial structure incomplete, eyes fused, Buried in family plot, no marker. By the 1920s, the Kinlocks had consolidated into a single compound, 4 houses arranged in a square around a shared courtyard. Neighbors described them as polite but secretive. Women rarely came to town. Children were homeschooled. When asked about the family's health, locals would grow quiet. Dr. Crenshaw's first documented visit to the Kinlock compound came in February 1933. A midwife from Tionesta had called the state medical examiner's office in desperation. A child had been born with severe deformities, and the family was refusing to allow the body to be removed for proper burial. Crenshaw arrived with a state health inspector and a sheriff's deputy. What he saw, he later wrote in his private notes, defied natural proportion. Crenshaw's earliest images from the Kinlock compound are almost clinical in their restraint. They show an infant, perhaps 2 weeks old, lying on a kitchen table covered with a white sheet. The child's skull is collapsed on one side, the bone visibly malformed. Its left arm ends at the elbow in a smooth, rounded stump. Not an amputation, but a congenital absence. The right hand has 3 fingers, each twice the normal length. Crenshaw's notes are matter of fact. Parents: Clara Kinlock and Joseph Kinlock, maternal uncle. Infant delivered at home February 9, 1933. No medical attendance. Lived 6 days. Family resisted autopsy. Specimen photographed in situ. But in the margins, scrawled in pencil, Crenshaw added something else. This is the 3rd child born to this couple. Previous 2 also malformed. Family insists this is God's will. Husband's sister is also his mother-in-law. Genetic collapse evident. The Kinlocks did not want the photograph taken. They did not want the body examined. But Pennsylvania law gave the state medical examiner broad authority in cases of unexplained infant death, and Crenshaw exercised it. Over the next 5 years, he returned to Forest County 11 more times. Each visit documented another child. Each child bore catastrophic deformities, and each time the parents were related by blood, sometimes as first cousins, sometimes more closely. By 1938, Crenshaw's photographs showed patterns. Siblings born years apart displayed identical cranial malformations. Multiple infants in the same family line had fused vertebrae, shortened femurs, supernumerary digits. The genetic degradation was not random. It was cumulative, and it was accelerating. In 1940, Dr. Crenshaw submitted a formal report to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. His conclusions were stark. The Kinlock family, along with at least 4 other isolated communities in the northwestern counties, families named Goss, Riddell, Steuben, and Varnum, were engaged in what he termed sustained endogamous breeding with catastrophic genetic consequences. He estimated that between 1900 and 1940, these families had produced over 200 children with severe congenital defects, most of whom died in infancy. He recommended mandatory genetic counseling, state-supervised medical care, and in extreme cases, intervention to prevent further cousin marriages. The state's response was immediate and unequivocal. The report was rejected. A letter from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, dated March 1941, stated that Crenshaw's findings were speculative, sensationalist, and inconsistent with the known health profile of the Commonwealth. The families he named were law-abiding citizens whose private lives were not subject to state intrusion. The genetic theories he cited were controversial and unproven. Crenshaw was ordered to cease his investigations. He did not. Instead, he began documenting his cases in secret. Every photograph, every autopsy note, every family tree went into the hidden cabinet in the basement darkroom. He continued his work for another 18 years, until his retirement in 1959. By then, he had catalogued deformities that defied medical explanation. Among the most disturbing images in Crenshaw's archive are those of the Varnum twins, born in Clarion County in June 1952. The girls were named Prudence and Constance. They were delivered at home by their grandmother, who was also their father's aunt. The parents, Raymond Varnum and his first cousin, Lillian, had already lost 4 children to natural causes. The twins survived 3 months. Crenshaw's photographs show them lying side by side in a wooden crib. At first glance, they appear normal, but closer inspection reveals the horror. Their skulls are joined at the temple, fused by a thick ridge of bone. They are not conjoined twins in the traditional sense, Their bodies are separate, fully formed, but their heads are locked together, facing opposite directions. Crenshaw's notes describe the medical impossibility: craniopagus fusion, lateral presentation. No shared brain tissue, no vascular connection. Bone fusion occurred post-birth, not in utero. Family claims the joining appeared over the first week of life. Impossible under known ossification timelines. Parents refused surgical consultation. Infants died August 14, 1952. Cause: cranial pressure, asphyxiation. Bodies buried on family land. Specimens not recovered. In the margin, he wrote a single word: unnatural. Dr. Vasquez, analyzing the case in 1993, noted something else. The Varnum family had a history of cranial abnormalities stretching back 4 generations. Census records showed that Raymond Varnum's grandfather had married his own niece in 1891. Their children, in turn, married within the family. By the time Prudence and Constance were born, the Varnum gene pool had been closed for over 60 years. The twins were not an anomaly. They were the inevitable result. In 1995, a Pennsylvania antique dealer purchased a box of documents at an estate sale in Venango County. Among them was a leather-bound ledger, water-stained and brittle, with the name Goss embossed on the cover. Inside were entries spanning 1898 to 1957. It was a family breeding record. The ledger listed births, deaths and marriages in meticulous columns. But it also included something chilling: notes on desirable traits and undesirable outcomes. Children were rated for constitution, form, and purity of line. Marriages were planned years in advance, arranged to preserve strength. One entry, dated 1923, reads: married Esther Goss, age 16, to her uncle, Nathaniel Goss, age 34. Esther of sound constitution, good temperament. Nathaniel's line strong. First child expected spring 1924, hope for male issue. The next entry: infant Goss, male, stillborn April 1924, skull collapsed, limbs malformed, disposed in orchard. Esther to try again. Dr. Crenshaw had visited the Goss family in 1935, summoned by a rural doctor who delivered a child with severe cranial distortion. His photograph shows an infant boy with a skull split by a deep fissure, the two halves separated by exposed brain tissue. The child lived for 18 hours. Crenshaw's notes indicate that the father and mother were half-siblings, sharing the same father but different mothers, both of whom were also Gosses. The ledger ended abruptly in 1957. The final entry, line concluded. No viable issue. Family name to be buried. In 1998, a maintenance worker renovating the old Pennsylvania State Hospital in Harrisburg discovered something in a sealed sub-basement storage room. 34 glass jars filled with formaldehyde, each containing a preserved human specimen, fetal remains, infant organs, partial skulls. Every jar was labeled with a surname: Kinloch, Goss, Riddell, Varnum, Steuben. Every jar was accompanied by a handwritten note in Dr. Crenshaw's script. The specimens confirmed what the photographs suggested. The deformities were not isolated tragedies. They were patterned, repeated, inherited. Fused bones, supernumerary organs, skeletal malformations. Each appeared across multiple generations. In the same family lines, one jar contained the preserved head of an infant with a condition modern geneticists call diprosopus, facial duplication. The child had 2 noses, 3 eyes, and a partially formed second mouth. Crenshaw's label read: subject, infant Riddell. Born 1946, parents, brother and sister, confirmed. Lived 4 hours. 5th documented case of duplication in family. Genetic line unsustainable. The state of Pennsylvania seized the specimens and immediately sealed them under a medical privacy statute. They were never displayed, never studied publicly, and never returned to the families. Officially, they were destroyed in 2001, but Dr. Vasquez, who examined the specimens in 1998 before they were confiscated, published a single paragraph in a genetics journal. The specimens recovered from the Harrisburg facility represent a unique archive of extreme consanguineous genetic collapse. The degree of malformation observed is consistent with multi-generational inbreeding within isolated closed populations. Several cases display anomalies not documented in contemporary medical literature. Further study is required, but access has been denied. That paragraph was redacted within 6 months. The last image in Dr. Crenshaw's hidden archive is dated November 1958. It shows a girl, approximately 12 years old, sitting in a wooden chair in what appears to be a farmhouse kitchen. She is smiling, but her face is wrong. Her eyes are set too far apart, almost on the sides of her head. Her nose is flattened, nearly absent. Her mouth is wide, stretched, revealing teeth that are small and uniform, like a child's baby teeth that never fell out. She is holding a doll. On the back of the photograph, Crenshaw wrote, "Subject Margaret Steuben, age 12, estimated. Parents unknown, raised by family collective. Mental development normal. Physical development arrested. Subject displays classical markers of extreme inbreeding. Hypertelorism, midfacial hyperplasia, dental retention, skeletal dysplasia. Family claims she is blessed. No birth record exists. Subject alive as of this documentation. Location, Steuben Homestead, Forest County. This is the last case I will document. I am too old and the state will not act. God forgive us all. Margaret Steuben does not appear in any census after 1960. No death certificate exists. No grave has been found. But in 2003, a photographer hiking near the abandoned Steuben property in Forest County reported seeing a woman standing in the window of the old farmhouse. She was middle-aged, he guessed, though her face was strange in a way he couldn't articulate. She waved at him. He waved back. When he returned with the sheriff a week later, the house was empty. No furniture, no belongings, just dust and silence, and on the kitchen wall carved into the wood with a knife. We are still here. Dr. Ambrose Crenshaw died in 1964, alone in a Philadelphia nursing home. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette described him as a dedicated public servant who had served Pennsylvania with distinction for 3 decades. There was no mention of the photographs, no mention of the families, no mention of the hidden cabinet or the specimens, or the children whose faces he documented with such clinical precision. The state's official position remains unchanged. The cases Crenshaw documented either never occurred or were misattributed. The families named in his notes cannot be verified. The genetic collapse he described is statistically implausible, but the photographs still exist. Copies were made. Researchers like Dr. Vasquez have preserved the records, even as the state continues to deny access to the original archive. And in the remote valleys of northwestern Pennsylvania, in counties where roads still turn to dirt and family names repeat across generations, there are houses that stand empty now, compounds abandoned, graveyards overgrown, with stones that bear the same surname over and over. Stretching back to the 1800s, the bloodlines may have ended, but the photographs remain, silent, undeniable proof that for over half a century, the state of Pennsylvania looked the other way, while entire families collapsed inward, generation by generation, into genetic oblivion. Dr. Crenshaw knew. He documented it. He hid the evidence because he understood that some truths are too monstrous for the public record, and in the end, the state declared his work impossible. But the children in those photographs were real. They lived. They suffered. They died. And somewhere in a darkroom that no longer exists, their faces still stare out from the chemical-stained paper, waiting for someone to finally see them.